Oh, it is recording. Okay, so good afternoon,
Hi, how are you?
Diane. That's an easy name to remember. So, Diane, thank you for contacting me
Hmm.
because I had the last minute uh, need for a guest. So, and on top of that, the topic seems interesting. I never had someone doing that topic before.
Hmm.
So, so you do research on egg donors,
Hmm.
obviously. Is that what it is?
Currently, that's the research that I'm doing is on egg donors' decisions and experiences. Yes.
Okay. So you don't do the actual medical part.
No. Basically, my work. Women have been donating their eggs for about the past 30 years or so.
Okay.
But in that time, there's been really no research on what women's experiences are as egg donors. And but there's been a lot of research on what people's experiences are with infertility.
Okay.
And basically, several years back, a woman who had been donating her eggs started an organization called We Are Egg Donors, and she contacted me because a number of women had been contacting her with that organization, and she knew of my other work as a medical anthropologist that I had done on sperm banking and things like that. And basically, she told me that nobody's been doing this research on women's experiences as egg donors. And
You decided to take on?
I decided to take it on because a lot of women had a lot of questions about, are there any risks? What's the long-term impact on my life? And things like that. And nobody else had really taken on that work
It's a
before.
long-term research.
It's a long-term research, right, right. I've been doing it now for 3 years.
Yeah.
And basically, I've been starting off interviewing women, at any phase of the process. So before becoming an egg donor, and then as they go through their egg donation cycles, during the process of egg donation, and then even women who are now, say, in their 50s and have children that were born from their egg donation maybe 18 years ago and wanting to meet those kids.
Ah,
So, and
interesting.
yeah, so they have that longitudinal perspective or that retrospect.
You can still like contact them.
Um, I'm sorry?
You can contact these people.
I can?
No,
Or
I mean the people who have reached that age. You can still get hold of them.
a lot of times with egg donation with donor conceived children in general, there will be maybe a desire for the children. If they know that they were conceived from sperm or egg donation, maybe they want to meet the donor. Yeah, because they're curious.
So they keep track of the record.
Some places do. It hasn't been consistent
Okay.
throughout the years, but some places
Makes
do.
sense. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's a very kind of delicate kind of research because not
Yes.
everybody might want to participate or something.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
would think.
yeah.
Some people want to keep their privacy. Even though in this research everything is anonymous.
Right, right. So anybody that I interview for my research, it's all anonymous. I take
100%.
away I change their names, I change their identifying information, things like that.
So the person who kind of asked you to take the project is the lady you spoke to?
Well, she and I had started talking.
Oh,
Yeah.
together you decided to do it.
Well, initially together, we were going to do a collaborative creative project.
Ah,
Because she wanted to do a book on a visual, like a photographic essay book, and do some interviews along with that. And I'm as a researcher, as an anthropologist, my work is primarily doing qualitative interviews, asking people open-ended questions and letting them take the flow of the conversation, basically, but still having sort of a structure of the kinds of things that I want to cover. So she and I collaborated initially, and then she started off doing some other work, and I started focusing more full time on this. And then her organization has been instrumental in helping recruit egg donors that might want to participate in my research because they want to see more research done on women's experiences when they decide to go through this process.
okay. So the research is pretty much non-scientific. It's like you don't get into people's body or anything like that to test.
I don't draw blood or
Right.
things like that.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, yeah. It's
So
scientific in another way in
it's
terms of
scientific in terms that you collect data.
yes. Like so, I basically what I do is say you've been an egg donor and
Okay.
you find out about my study, and then you'll contact me. Then my research assistant or I will send you a link to an online questionnaire that we have prepared, and then they'll go through that questionnaire, and if they want to be interviewed, then they can put their email in that questionnaire, and then it will come to my email address, and then I'll contact them and then set up time for an interview. So I'll either interview them in person if they're in California, or over Skype. I've got egg donors that I've interviewed from Australia, South Africa, Spain, Colombia, Canada, and the United States. So I'm interviewing women from all over the world.
Oh, okay. So it's pretty much an international project. Is it sponsored by UCSF?
I did receive a grant from UCSF, a small grant to do an exploratory pilot study.
But it doesn't belong to them.
The research does.
Final.
No, I mean, well, that's kind of a technical thing to get into in terms of like how research is structured.
They have access maybe to the final data.
Right. Well, I would be writing articles on the final data. I mean, I am the steward of the data, so basically means I'm not going to release my data to anybody else in terms of the raw data.
You have the right to it.
Right, because the people who sign the consent forms, they sign those with me, and that's our agreement that, yeah.
So it's up to you who would get access to it.
Right, I have to be very careful to protect everybody's anonymity, so as a researcher, that's why I have access to the data.
As far as anonymity, that's understood, but as far as the results.
Oh, well, the results, then I do the analysis, I publish the results in academic peer-reviewed journals, and then I'm also writing some online or some articles that will be more accessible to egg donors so that they have access to more information. Okay. I'll be posting information on my websites. I'm also
doing a movie.
Yes, in addition to the research project, I'm doing a film called The Perfect Donor, and looking at not only women's experiences, but some sort of raising those ethical questions. What does it mean to provide genetic material to other people's children? What does it mean to be compensated, sometimes thousands of dollars for a piece of your DNA, so to speak?
Right.
And how do people think about those kids? Do they want
adopted kids?
Yeah. Do they see them as their children? Do they want to get to know them? How do they perceive their own genetic material? And then also when it comes to the industry, the industry, yeah, exactly. When it comes to the industry, a lot of money is being made in the fertility industry off of egg donation, and women can make a lot of money at it as well. But so there also is kind of like, who is the perfect donor? So a lot of people have this idea in mind of the woman that they want to be the genetic
30
contributor.
years old or younger.
Not only that, but where did she get her education? What kind of hobbies does she have?
Is she smart?
Is she smart? Is she pretty? Is she athletic? Does she play piano? So you start getting this sort
Does she have skills?
Yeah.
And what's her history in terms of disease in the family?
Yeah, the health history, the genetic history.
So
but
there's a lot of research in that too.
Exactly. And a lot of it comes down to people feel like if they're going to be paying for somebody,
they want the best.
They want the best. Or they want themselves only better, so...
Do they ask also for blonde or brunette?
A lot of blonde hair, blue-eyed donors. Blonde hair, blue-eyed donors are very popular.
Are in demand.
High demand, yeah. And there's actually...
So do they raise their price because they have blue eyes?
Well, in some places they can get more for their eggs than other places. There's also some agencies that cater to elite clientele, people that have a lot of money, that
can choose.
They want a hard to find donor. Like what they're looking for is very specific, and so yeah.
I don't know. There's also the other issue that has nothing to do with your research. But 20 years ago, the Earth had 5 billion people.
Right.
And now we're reaching, 20 years later, 7 billion. Mm-hmm. So it will be another maybe 20 to 30 years, and we'll be approaching 10 billion.
Right, yeah, population.
So is there really a need to go to outside sources to make more babies?
Well, I mean, that's sort of a values question, I mean, people, when they
Why not adopt those that are already born?
Well, the people that are experiencing infertility or
They want their own?
involuntary childlessness, they have a lot of trauma.
Mm.
They have a lot of trauma and a lot of loss over not being able to conceive their so-called own child.
Okay.
And so there's a huge drive among people that are going through something like this to be, women
To
want
be
to
able to carry their own. I
women
see.
want to be able to carry their own child. They want to be able to have the experience of childbirth. They want to be able to nurse the child. And also, you have a lot of same-sex couples, gay couples,
Oh,
single
that's
men
true. That's true.
using egg donation and surrogacy to create their families. So theoretically, yes, you could adopt, but on the other hand, there's that somewhat of
There's
an
that
innate biological drive.
to
And
have
then,
your own.
and in addition, internationally, the international adoption market has really closed down. So, for example, many people, especially gay couples, used to go to India or China or Russia to adopt
And
children.
it's harder now.
Now they can't because international adoption has become far more restrictive after a number of scandals.
Oh.
And so what you find now is that since international adoption has closed down, then you find people going to other alternatives. So like surrogacy and egg donation. Exactly. So international surrogacy and international egg donation has actually become a huge business now, because now you have both same-sex couples and straight couples or individuals going internationally to get services as well, because a lot of times in the international market it might be less expensive than a donor or a surrogate.
So they might travel for it?
Absolutely. They travel for it all the time. For example, in France, egg donation and surrogacy is against the law. So you have a lot of people going to Spain or to California.
Oh,
So there's different industries.
interesting.
Yeah.
So in Russia, where there's a lot of people with blue eyes, there's a lot of travel to Russia?
Yeah, you do get a lot of Russian donors. Well, you get a lot of actually Northern or Eastern European donors, Romanian donors, Ukrainian donors.
They
They're
need the
very,
money.
they need the money,
And they have the traits.
and they have the fair skin and often fair features that
so
people
they are a good target.
exactly.
Are they-
Unfortunately,
Are they aware that they are in demand?
I think they probably are aware in the fact that they're getting recruited to donate eggs. But the interesting thing is that a lot of women coming from these Eastern European countries, they're not getting paid as much for their eggs. For example, in Spain, the regulations state that you can't pay a donor more than about 1,000 euros for her eggs. Whereas here in the United States, I've heard
10,000.
a range, well, between 1,200 and 10,000 is the average,
Oh.
but I've heard as high as 250,000.
Oh, it depends of the quality of the egg.
It depends on the quality of the donor. If that donor has those kinds of traits that you're looking for. So again, a high demand donor.
It's like eBay. I'm gonna bet on it.
Right,
I'm
right.
gonna upgrade it.
If I got my PhD from Harvard, for example, I'm going to be able to ask a much higher price than if I got
Just a BA.
just a BA or an associate's degree or wasn't college educated. So, or if I'm really, really pretty and I was a model, or something, I can ask
You can
more.
ask for more money.
And if I'm a proven donor, which means somebody else already conceived using my eggs, I would have a higher value than somebody who hasn't been a proven donor.
Okay.
So if I produce a lot of eggs, that's going to have a higher value
And
as
also
well.
if you're in super good health.
Well, yes. I mean, that's sort of the good health is sort of a given, But
Yeah, I mean, they're not
Yeah.
gonna take someone who has asthma or anything like that.
well, it's actually interesting. I was interviewing a genetics counselor once and asking her, and she was talking about intended parents coming to her with their donors that have gone through genetics counseling, and she was saying that an intended parent would much rather have an egg donor who had a family history of cancer in their family than an egg donor who had a family history of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Oh, that's interesting.
And right. And then the reasoning is because ADHD is going to affect that child in childhood and affect parenting. And it's much easier to parent a child that doesn't have that than it is to parent a child that does. Whereas the
Doesn't mean
rationale,
each child will have it though.
it doesn't mean that they will, but the rationale for the intended parents is like, well, cancer's down the road, but ADHD is now. So
Never heard of that one.
yeah, exactly. It gets some surprising, and people have some very surprising views in terms of what they think is genetically inherited versus what actually is genetically inherited. So
Interesting.
yeah.
On average, how many people can you get hold of within, let's say, a week or a month?
You mean how many people contact me to participate in my research, or
No, how many people you contact and who are willing to participate?
They usually come to me.
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
They want to volunteer information.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, most egg donors are, like I said, are really interested in seeing more research being done on this because there's been so little, and they really feel like they want access to more information. And there's not enough information out there right now in terms of the the health risks, the benefits, the emotional benefits, and the emotional risks, and basic things like, are they going to be taxed on their egg donation income?
I see.
So a lot of women go through this, and then they get a bill from the IRS, and they're shocked because
They don't want to give half their money to the IRS.
exactly. Well, not only that, but they're not getting paid for work. They're
No.
getting paid to
For
help,
donation, yeah.
right, and for their time and trouble, and they're taking on health risks to go through
How
this.
will the government find out?
Because many of the egg donation agencies will submit a 1099.
Really?
And then the IRS finds out, and they come back to the donor.
IRS wants their piece of the
They've got their
pie.
hands on women's eggs. I know.
They
It's,
want a piece of everything.
exactly. Yeah.
It's funny. Even the city wants to get a piece of everything.
Yeah.
They try to get into people's private dealings.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. You can't get away from it.
Yeah. So that's another thing. The
Yeah.
IRS.
Yeah.
So when they come to you to consult you, you charge them a fee, I assume, as a consultant.
Oh God, no. Oh, egg donors?
No. Who's gonna pay your fee for your data?
Well, basically, I need to write grants to get funding for my research.
Oh, grants.
And it's been very, very challenging to get funding for this research. So that's been a huge stumbling block, is trying to get the funding, because it's some I can't really imagine why, actually, because it seems to me it's really important.
Consultant, let's say a woman wants to consult you at where to get the egg or where.
Well, I'm a researcher. I'm not a consultant.
Oh, so you're
Yeah.
not gonna tell people where to go to get the egg.
Oh gosh, no. Because
That has nothing to do with your agency.
well, I'm not an agency.
Or your job.
I'm an academic researcher. I'm a medical anthropologist. I'm based at UC San Francisco, University of California, San Francisco, in the Institute of Health and Aging. And basically, what I do is I do research on, at this point, women who are going through the process of being egg donors, looking at their experiences.
And how
Many
about
people.
and the recipient
I'm sorry.
and the person who's the recipient.
I'm not looking at the recipients right now.
Oh, okay.
I have done research on what people's experiences with infertility in the past, looking at how they experience stigma, loss, shame, etc., surrounding involuntary childlessness.
Okay.
But because there's been so little research on egg donors, and these are young women, often between 19 and say mid-20s, and nobody's taken the time really, or very few people have taken the time to look at how this impacts their lives. And so right now my work is specifically focusing on egg donors and what they go through, what their experiences are. And then once I have all the data collected and analyzed, then I will write up research reports, I will publish things in journals, I will publish things online, in magazines, et cetera, et cetera. So and put it on my website. So my main focus right now is to gather the information from women as they're going through the process, or their hindsight, how they think about it now after having done it years ago, and then collect all that information and say, this is what I found. Yeah. So I do not provide counseling services or consulting services for people looking for eggs. So,
But you have that information.
I have information in terms of what people experience as they go through infertility. Yes.
Okay.
From past work.
You have it, but you don't charge for that information.
No. I don't charge
If someone
people.
talks to you about the topic, you don't say make an appointment with my secretary so you
No,
can consult
no.
with me about it.
No, I don't do that kind of thing. Not
Okay.
at all. Yeah.
But you since you spoke to so many people or received so much information, after a while you're gonna gather so much information
Right.
that you can classify it by, hey, look, this is coming from that country. This is coming from that country. This is where people should go. Then that's extra information that you can classify for other purposes.
You're right. Well, I could take whatever data I have and use it in a variety of different ways, apply it in
Yes.
different ways. To date, I've interviewed close to 100 egg donors. For my research, I've interviewed another 10 or so for my documentary film,
Okay.
The Perfect Donor. And then I've also got about 170 survey questionnaires that people have filled out. And so, for example, I could give you the data that with all the people that I've interviewed, about 90% are of Euro-American descent.
Okay. Okay.
About 5% are of African descent. About 10% are of Asian
Chinese.
descent.
Okay.
Exactly. So I
So
could tell you those numbers.
the euro is more in demand because there's less of them.
Well, no, there's more of them, but people want. This gets into issues surrounding eugenics, basically,
Okay.
which means which means sort of the dominant mainstream perspective tends to be that some people have more value than others, right?
Okay.
And based on these sort of physical traits, on intellectual traits, and so on. And so, one of the things that I'm really interested in is what are the ethics surrounding people having different value as
Ah,
human beings.
yeah.
So one of the things that I'm trying to deal with is these
Can,
very
you cannot
difficult
measure
ethical
that.
questions.
Yeah, you cannot measure it.
Well, I mean, you can look at the ethical ramifications of it. You can look at the implications of it. And you can say, for example, I mean, on the one hand, you've got this huge market where women are commodifying their own bodies.
Okay.
And and using their bodies as a site of labor.
Okay.
And so that to me is very interesting on that perspective. But at the same time, what does it mean when you live in a society where, my eggs are worth 10,000 and yours are worth 2,000, or nobody even wants your eggs because you're not in the right, you don't have the right demand, and you kind of get to these very in-depth, deep ethical questions about who is considered to be fit to reproduce and who is not.
Yeah.
And so these are and this this dates back to some very serious political events in our history, of the world, and has implications for the human future as well. So, and then people talk about designer babies. Well, what are you looking for when you're shopping for these designer traits to create designer babies?
Yeah.
So, I mean, some
the
of those
best
issues,
looking or the best
right?
6 foot tall.
Right, and sometimes not even those. Like, for example, I'm currently working on my book. My book is called, this was based on some earlier research I had done on sperm donation among single women and lesbian couples, and how do people choose a donor when they're not trying to match that donor to a male partner. So I was
Okay.
very interested in how do people think about genetics. And so I interviewed about 30 single straight women and 30 lesbian couples, so about 90 women altogether. And then I interviewed another 30 sperm donors, and then I also did field work in sperm donation or sperm banks. Okay, so I worked behind the desk collecting data from their files, that kind of thing. And my book that I'm currently working on writing is called Romancing the Sperm, The Shifting Politics of Alternative American Family, and looking at how in the 1980s and 90s, how women had difficulty accessing reproductive care given the political climate. This is a time, for example, when Murphy Brown, was one of the first single mothers on TV, and Dan Quayle was questioning, family values and all this kind of thing.
Okay.
Well, so the book is actually going to be looking at from the 1990s to today, after the Supreme Court decision a couple of years ago, Obergefell, which provided same-sex couples the right to marry.
Oh, to marry.
To marry, exactly, and have these dynamics changed and have these values surrounding family changed since the 1990s to today. Well, before the before the election, I thought this was going to be a positive story in terms of how far we've come. But now, since the election, we can see that with the conservative administration coming in, you can see that there's probably going to be some information basically saying we have a long way to go in terms of people's rights to not only marry, but to have their families recognized and to be able to bring children into their lives without having, these political ramifications, without having the government in people's individual lives and so on.
That's another one.
Yeah, exactly. So the book will be.
The thing is, it's not that some races are more valued than others. It's that some have more people than others. Like there's 1.2 billion Indian. There's no need to procreate more, or there's 2 billion Asian or more. There's no need to reproduce more of those. It looks like those who are more expensive are those that are minorities.
No, I wouldn't say that at all. No, not at all.
There's not as many white reproduction. I mean, the birth rate in whites is lower than in some other ethnic groups.
Um, that you have what you have is you have a larger population of affluent people that can afford these kinds of services.
Okay.
So you have more people that might be of Euro-American descent, for example, that are upper middle class or middle class that can afford to
Afford it?
take out maybe a second mortgage on their home to pay for their fertility treatment.
Ah,
Okay, to be able to pay $10,000 for an egg donor, to be able to pay $26,000 for an in vitro fertilization cycle, and so on. So you have this economic stratification where you have some people that have higher economic level of economic resources, and those particular people tend to also want to reproduce themselves, obviously, and then also and it's not accurate to say that there's not a demand for Chinese donors, for example. There's a huge demand for Chinese donors from people from China. There's a huge demand for Asian donors in general, of all Asian ancestry, South Asian. There's a very big demand for that as well. But
so
what?
you're saying some cost more than others?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not that there is not enough demand. It's just that when there is a demand, it doesn't cost as much. Let's say there is a demand for a Chinese-born Chinese baby.
Mm-hmm.
It won't cost as much as another race. Is that
That's
what you're
that's
saying?
not that's not
That's
true.
not what you said.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay,
No.
who costs more then?
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of too simplistic a way to look at it. You know what I mean? You can't say this. What you can say, like this race costs more than that race. Or
That's
using
not it.
using race in a very, very, very loose, because there's basically only one race, the human race. So, but how people think about it out there in the world. So I would say ancestry rather than race, first of all. So I want to clarify that. You do have, for example, there's a elite donor agency where they specialize in finding Asian donors, because Asian donors might be difficult to find because of cultural obstacles.
They don't want to give their eggs.
They don't want to give their eggs. They might find that some people might have families that are very conservative, and if their parents found out, they could be disowned or something along those lines. So in different cultures, you have different perspectives towards your body, towards your reproductive material, and towards kinship and genealogy and passing your genes down and connectedness to the family, right? So
to strangers.
yeah, so there could be some very heavy cultural taboos in some cultures.
So they don't do it.
Not as much. And so when you have a couple coming from China that wants to do an egg donation cycle in Los Angeles, for example, the agency and the clinic in Los Angeles will try to find them a Chinese donor, but the Chinese donors don't come forward as much, or Chinese women don't come forward as much to donate their eggs.
More in marketing to find it.
Right, so they might have a team of people that go out into the streets, literally, and look for young women at a concert, right? And come up to them, approach them, to recruit them, right?
Okay, so there's a lot of things involved in that.
There's a ton involved, it's a lot of things.
There's a lot of data. It's not just one story or one conclusion. There's many.
It's multifaceted, it's very complex,
Very complex, and you try to sort that into categories, kind of thing.
I'm trying to tell the story. So basically, I'm getting all this information, and I'm telling the story, and eventually I'll be writing a book about this as well, and then again some of the story will come out in my films, and then in the research write-ups.
How far down in the film are you?
It's mostly shot, pretty much all shot. We're pretty much in post-production. So
is it with real subject or with actors?
Oh, not actors. No, it's a documentary. So
real people.
Real people, yes.
Real egg donors.
Real egg donors, real physicians. I'm sorry?
They get paid to do it then?
No.
They do it like voluntarily?
Exactly, yeah. No, I don't usually pay people to participate in my research or whatever, because to me that's a little bit,
biased, maybe.
Yeah, not only that, but I find that people really want to tell their story,
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought you would pay some subject to participate.
No, no, I mean,
Not
no,
even for their time, you don't pay.
not usually. No, no.
Okay,
Yeah,
so it's
people
just
volunteer to.
so it's just for information value that you are doing this movie then.
Well, there's a number of reasons why I'm doing the film. Um, so basically, like I said, there's very little research or very little information available currently to egg donors about what this process is like and what they might expect to have happen as they go through it and how they might think about it later.
Okay.
So for the film, I've interviewed about 10 egg donors. Again, most of them from the United States, but some from other countries as well. Like I said, South Africa, Australia, Barbados, Canada, etc.
Okay.
And I've also interviewed reproductive endocrinologists, physicians, genetics counselor, psychologists, intended parents who were going to use an egg donor, and then agency recruiters. So you have egg donation agencies where somebody starts an agency and they help to match the egg donor to the intended parents. So if I come to I'm 40 years old, my eggs don't work anymore. I call up an agency. I say, can you find me a blonde-haired, blue-eyed egg donor with a PhD from Berkeley, or whatever's on my bucket list, and they might have a database of donors that I can shop through myself and pick somebody that I feel an affinity with. And usually the person who's choosing a donor would choose somebody that they feel a connection to for some reason. So I've interviewed people from all aspects of the egg donation process. And ultimately, the film will show all these sides. And the intention is to provide people with all the range of issues that egg donation raises, socially, ethically, personally, financially, and so on, as well as look at people's experiences with it. Some women had very positive experiences and are happy about their egg donations. Other women had major health complications connected to their egg donations. And so I want to be able to have all that information so that when people do decide to go through this process, that they have access to information that they don't currently have. And my ultimate goal is to provide educational packages available for universities to buy a copy of it for their library. And you could show it in a classroom on women and gender studies or women's health or medical anthropology or something along those lines.
So it'll be available in libraries and stuff.
I hope so. That's my plan. I'd like to also be able to distribute it
Online, maybe?
online, maybe. I've been looking into grants from ITVS, PBS, so possibly some of that kind of public broadcasting types of programs, because it's something that hasn't really been addressed much before. And, excuse me, and it's a new topic. And it's a very important topic because you're dealing with I could use some water, but
Oh, sure, you're almost done.
that's okay. But it's a very important topic because it raises a variety of ethical challenges. So,
Okay. Yeah, we have pretty much passed the 30 minutes. So
oh, okay.
If you want to wrap it up in what you think, when will your movie be out?
I'm hoping to get it out this year. Like I said, we're in post-production. A lot of it depends on fundraising.
And
So
you'll try to post it in some festivals, maybe?
I would like to. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah. If anybody's listening,
Yeah, it's
okay.
still on.
Okay. Yeah. So one of my main goals right now is to get the funds to finish the film. I need to hire an editor. I need color correction, all the post-production costs. So I've been,
So the videotaping is done.
the recording is done. Yes, the shooting is done. Just
Okay.
need to get that done.
UCSF must have a department of production there, but
Not for what
really.
I mean, I'm doing this documentary film independently of UCSF. This is my own thing that's not
Okay.
connected to the university.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I look forward maybe to see it one day, maybe by next year.
I hope so. Yes.
So
Yeah.
send me a link if it
Absolutely.
will be online.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was very interesting to see what you're doing. I mean, and I would never have thought about doing such study, but there's always someone out there who has an idea and they do it.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
And if you have any other topic, feel free to contact me. So this was Dr. Diane Tober. They call you doctor because you do all kinds of research.
Well, I have a PhD
Oh,
in medical anthropology from Berkeley, so that means
medical anthropology.
yes,
Okay.
yes,
So that qualifies you to do research
Mm-hmm.
and more research and things like that.
exactly.
So thank you so much for being here. I
Yeah,
enjoyed
thank you.
interviewing you. It was interesting.
Thank you. Yes.
Diane, a couple things came to my mind after I wrapped up the interview, and that's the topic of the age, and also what kind of people donate. I was thinking about it actually when I was interviewing you. Does the person who has donate eggs already had all the kids they want?
Most of the people who donate eggs, most of the women who donate eggs or provide eggs because they're getting paid for it, are between the ages of 18 and about 26. Okay, so most of them are college students,
And they haven't had kids yet.
they have not had children of their own yet. In my research, there are about out of nine, no, out of close to 100 women, like I said. In my research, there are 5 out of that 100 that, after being an egg donor, were not able to have their own children.
Is that because they ran out of eggs?
Well, it's not because they necessarily run out of eggs. Actually, well, one person did have.
Gave too many.
Well, no, I wouldn't put it that way. One person had premature ovarian failure
Okay.
following her egg donation, but you can't necessarily say that one caused the other.
Okay.
Because premature ovarian failure can happen anyway.
But the woman has a certain number of eggs in her ovaries. So if you use them all for sale, then how many are left for yourself?
Well, okay, how this is explained is that every month a woman naturally produces
one egg.
no. Every month a woman naturally will produce, say I would automatically every month produce 20 follicles, okay?
Oh,
follicles. But not all of those follicles are going to mature. I only will have enough FSH, like follicle stimulating hormones, to produce 1 or 2 to maturity. Okay, so with egg donation, you're self-injecting hormones for about 3 weeks in this process, and what those hormones do is it makes it so all of those eggs that you naturally produce ripen instead of just one. So you might produce 20 eggs in a cycle, or I've heard even as high as 80 eggs in a single cycle for some of the donors that I've interviewed. Most are producing between 30 and 50, even as egg donors in a single cycle, because they're being given enough of those hormones to bring all the eggs that they would follicles that they would naturally produce to maturity. So so some women are producing quite a high number of eggs in a single cycle. Could that damage their fertility? Yes, it could. Because one thing that can happen is that your ovaries can swell up. And if your ovary gets too heavy, or if you move or exercise, it can twist in your body and cut off blood flow to the ovary. And then, so there is one woman that actually had to have her ovary removed after being an egg donor because it twisted in her body and cut off circulation.
Oh my God.
Right. And
So
then
that could happen.
that can happen. It's one of the risks that can happen.
So and then it's not worth the 10,000.
Right. Well, then you have to juggle that. Is the money worth the risk? Now, if a woman doesn't necessarily want to have kids of her own because she, for whatever reason, and she wants to be an egg donor, I do find some women don't want to have their own children, and that's okay. Now, you can't say that egg donation necessarily causes infertility. I won't say that because, again, the research hasn't been done to look at the impact of egg donation on women's health over time. But I can say out of the egg donors that I've interviewed, 5 so far were infertile after egg donation. They were not able to have their own children after egg donation. And these are women that several of them happen to know that there might be 5, 6, 7 other children out there being raised by other families that came from their eggs. So for women that have been egg donors and then experiencing infertility afterwards, that can be quite traumatic to know that you have children out there. And many egg donors...
If the parents who bought the egg die, can that person adopt that child?
No. I mean, it would be like... It's once you give up your eggs and it's fertilized with somebody else's sperm.
It goes into another legislation totally.
It's not your child. You sign a contract.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the family will take care of what happened to that child.
So I would imagine
not
so.
you.
Not the egg donor, unless you happen to have. There are some egg donors that are in known donation relationships, so they might get to meet the intended parents. They might get to meet the future child,
That could happen.
and so maybe if they have a close connection and they really like each other, perhaps that could happen. I've never heard of that happening yet, but theoretically it could. Yeah.
In the old days, people would adopt a child from a sister or cousin because
Yeah.
it was our relation. But now there isn't.
Right. Well, you know, it's actually happening. A number of the donors that I've interviewed, a couple have donated. One donor donated to her sister because her sister couldn't have
Yeah,
kids,
that's a good one.
or her cousin, or her aunt. I have.
Family is good.
Right. Right.
So it's you do it not for the money, but because you love the family.
Yeah, and you want to see your sister, you know,
Have a baby.
have a baby, right? So those kinds of situations are a little different than the people who are signing up at agencies.
Strictly
Yeah.
strangers.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something that might interest people. You just mentioned during the previous interview that after 40, people are looking to get eggs. Is that what you just said?
Right. Well, one of the things that's driving sort of the so-called human egg market is that you have women that are delaying childbirth,
Later.
childbearing later and later. They're pursuing careers. They think, oh, everything that I've worked for, I've always been able to achieve. I got my law
PhD.
degree. I got the best job. You know, I have the right husband. So does, you know, if you're a married couple, I have the house, everything, all my ducks in a row. I'm ready to have my child now, right? So they want to get everything just so. The white
And all
picket
of a
fence,
sudden they're 40.
and then all of a sudden they're 38 or 40 or even 35, and their fertility's declined. And so what you have is you have a lot of women that have delayed childbearing into their mid 30s or 40s, and then find out that they have low ovarian reserve and they're going to need an egg donor. And after spending thousands and thousands of dollars on in vitro fertilization and fertility treatments, then having this extra added thing of, oh, now I have to use somebody else's eggs and I can't have, you know, my own biological child. Now, lately, in the past several years, there's been a push for women to freeze their eggs when they're younger and use them later if they want to. That doesn't seem to be as effective as just going out and having your child. Well, they can. There's a new process called vitrification, which is a flash freezing process. It's a quick freezing process so that the egg does not get these icicles, because it used to be the icicles, the egg would die, right? So now with the flash freezing process, it freezes quickly and those eggs survive better. But a lot of women either end up not using the eggs, or they try to use them 3 to 5 years later, and then it doesn't work 100% of the time. So a lot of women are going and paying a lot of money to have what's being called fertility preservation, but in fact finding that excuse me, sorry, when it comes to actually using those eggs and trying to get pregnant, it doesn't work. So
It's very,
Like, want me to repeat that?
Very, very complicated. I mean, it's
Yeah.
sometimes it's disheartening.
Yeah.
Even yeah.
it is disheartening. I mean, you know, women and men do not have an equal reproductive playing field. We just don't. And so we have to make some very difficult decisions surrounding how we want to structure our lives
And careers.
in order to accommodate children. And it's not easy. And it's like almost every time you turn around, you're going to have to sacrifice someplace.
I remember the story of the singer, the Canadian singer Celine Dion. When her husband got cancer, they froze his sperm so that if he died,
Right.
she would be able to have more kids after he died.
Yeah.
So the sperm is possible to freeze longer then.
Sperm freezes better than eggs, and sperm banking has been around for a long time, and
They last very
it
long.
lasts very well, and frozen sperm seems to work just fine. Fresh sperm does work better, but frozen seems to be
If
fine.
your husband has cancer, you can freeze his sperm in case you want to have more kids from him.
Exactly. Yeah. That's very easy to do. I mean, then you're talking about, well, posthumous reproduction. Like, is it ethical to have a child with your husband after he's dead? I don't know. So that raises some interesting issues as well. But sperm freezes much better than eggs, even with the new technology for flash freezing. So
No, in case you have one child and you want to give another brother,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
the husband died.
Exactly. True. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of things happening behind the scene we're not aware of.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I guess this topic is close to you for a reason.
Yes. Um,
Did you look into that thing personally, or is
well,
it?
it's interesting. Talking about complicated decisions. Back in the late '80s, early '90s, I was a graduate student. So '89 is when I entered graduate school at Berkeley, and actually, in a number of years later, about 2 weeks before my 30th birthday, this is a personal story, but I'll tell it. 2 weeks before my 30th birthday, I found out I had very large cysts on my ovaries.
Okay.
And I had to have one of my ovaries removed because of this large cyst. So I was really frightened about my own infertility. And I was just turning 30.
It's too young.
And I was conducting research on women who were experiencing infertility at the time. And one woman told me, Diane, asked me, how old are you? And I said, I'm just turning 30. She's like, well, I'm 35. When was the last time you went to the doctor? I don't know, 5 years. She's like, what? And she said, go to the doctor immediately. You do not want to be like me, because she was 35 and childless. And she was very traumatized and crying during this interview. And it's basically because of her that I decided to go to the doctor, get checked out, found out there was something wrong. And once I found out that I was, 30 and with one ovary, I was in shock, thinking that my own eggs wouldn't work. And at that moment,
Because with the one ovary, they don't work as good.
it can, but I was terrified because I was doing research with people who were going through infertility. They were just 5 years ahead of me, and here I was in graduate school, not even thinking
about it.
because I'm healthy, I'm young, I'm strong, I work out, I eat right,
I'm attractive.
yeah,
What
and I was
else?
thinking all these things that I wasn't going to have a problem, but then. Turning 30 for me was really traumatic. Like in hindsight, it's like now I'm over 50, so it's like whatever. But at the time, and
So all of a sudden it hit you in the face.
it hit me in the face, and so I was doing this research on single women and lesbian couples choosing to have children on their own, but I couldn't bring myself to have children on my own. And I was looking at all these other people that were brave enough to embark on this journey with sperm donation, and I kind of was self-questioning, well, why couldn't I do that? Because for some reason, for me, it just felt like too much of a burden on so many emotional levels, for my family wanting to do things the right way, etc. So I quickly found a person that I never should have married, just so that I could, because I really was driven by, having a child.
ASAP.
I was still a graduate student, but I was in baby mode, and I wasn't going to give up on grad school either, and that was actually a good thing because having kids in grad school was fantastic. But in any case, that kind of took over my life, and that pushed me to do it. And so now I can understand both sides of it. I can understand, what it would be like to be a woman that can't use your own eggs, and how the emotion behind it, like coming to terms with that. But then now, later, I have two sons, they're both in their 20s, and I see these egg donors that are the same age as my sons, and I see some of them struggling medically, emotionally, or even happy with their decisions, but I feel like these could be my daughters or my sisters or whatever. And I feel compelled to do this research because I just can't imagine making such a huge decision at the age of 20 years old without having access to all the information I need.
Yeah. What if you become a star?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's going to go fine. Most of the times it does, but what if there's complications out there that I don't know about, and I made a decision because I need $10,000 to pay off my student loans,
now I can't
and I
have
don't
kids.
have the medical information. Yeah, to me that's just
So they won't tell them everything.
well,
They're
there's
supposed to.
the given the fact that the research hasn't been done,
Yeah.
and the egg donation's been occurring for over 30 years, but the research has not been done to track donor health over time. There's no registry, there's no longitudinal research looking at the impact of egg donation on women's health and fertility.
You're doing that.
That's what I'm trying to get started. That's what I've been trying. That's my
So
my
that'll
end
be a
goal.
public service too, huh?
Right. I mean, to me, it's like
And then
if you're going to
doctors-
donate a kidney, you need to have access to information. You know.
Right. Then fertility clinic will have to provide that information before people say,
Right.
yes, I'll donate my egg.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like as it is now, people can say, well, there's no evidence of risk, and the reason why there's no evidence of risk is because there's no evidence because nobody's collected it. So no evidence of risk doesn't necessarily mean no risk at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got
But
it.
I mean, and risk isn't even the only thing. I mean, there is that element, but there's also the other things, like how is a person at 20 doesn't know how they're going to feel about it when they're 30 or 40 or 50 or after they have their own kids. So those feelings change over time. You know, and I feel like women have a right to have access to information and to have that information to inform their decisions one way or the other, and also to be able to advocate for themselves going through the process. So, for example, there's some doctors that I've interviewed that have very conservative, cautious approaches with their donors. They use low dosages of hormones, try to get as few eggs as possible, 10 to 20 in a single cycle, and are very, concerned about their donors as patients. But there's been other doctors that I've interviewed that have been less cautious and use higher dosages of hormones and are retrieving 50 eggs on average from their high producing donors. And so you get these different standards of medical care. And I think if I were going to be an egg donor and I knew, hey, if I'm producing 50 mature follicles, maybe they can back down my medication, or something like that. So I only produce.
Clinic will
Yeah.
give them less.
Yeah, they can actually manage.
How many she can produce.
They can reduce the risk through how they prescribe the medications.
Okay.
And so if women know that, and they know that they've got some warning signs for example, there's a potential complication called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. If your ovaries are producing too much, you can get this fluid developing in your body.
Okay.
It can be life-threatening if you don't know that you have
You
it.
have to be monitored.
You have to be monitored, exactly. So if you're an egg donor and you know what the signs are for that particular complication, you can say, I don't feel comfortable producing more than X number of eggs. Can you roll back my medication a little bit? Or not even that. Maybe just, I don't feel comfortable having a completely anonymous donation. I want to be able to have my identity released. And you can negotiate that in your contract. There's all kinds of things you can negotiate in your contract. And that's what I want women to know. So if they are going to become an egg
The
donor.
more you know, the better.
Exactly.
Oh, so you're doing actually a public service.
Yes.
So yeah, that's good. I mean, once people know, then they'll have you to thank for. A kind of thing.
Yeah.
That they avoided the worst, which is to become infertile.
Or that's the worst case scenario. But or death would actually be the worst case scenario. But I think it's important for people to be informed.
Okay.
So that's what I'm trying to do.
Okay, I appreciate you doing it, even though I am not involved at this point. But thank you so much for clarifying these 2 points.
No problem.
And I look forward to see the interview again, because sometimes I space out and I don't listen to the whole answer. But to watch it again, I'm sure I'll pick up all the information. So thank you
Great.
so much.
Thank you
for being here.
And twice.
So
Thank
this
you.
was part 2.
Yeah.